When we talk about Jesus in the Bible, rarely do we come to the subjects of eternal curses and folklore. Of course, you have the curse of man from the fall of Eden, and of course, you have the curse that was laid upon Lucifer for deceiving Adam and Eve. But these curses are exceedingly rare the farther we get out of the Old Testament. But my friends, the tale I am bringing you today is a tale of the man cursed by Jesus of Nazareth to walk the earth for all eternity, to stand and wonder and watch until the last day of man. The folk tale of the wandering son of Judea, the cursed man, Cartaphilus. Grab a seat, grab a drink. I've got a story for you. When Jesus of Nazareth was handed over to Pontius Pilate to determine if he had committed any crimes. Now, Pilate was the governor of Judea at the time, and he was sort of the guy who enforced the law. He was the one who determined the relationship between Caesar and the synagogues and the people. He's a busy guy. But Jesus was handed over to him to determine if he had committed a crime, and he did in turn interrogate Jesus and found that he had committed no wrong. So he went back to the leaders of the synagogue and said, "This guy didn't do anything. What do you want me to do with him?" And they were like, "We want you to crucify him, crucify him.
Crucify him.
Get rid of him. We don't like him. He's claimed to be God. We don't want him here anymore." And so Pilate, he whipped him. He had him lashed. And he said, "Is this not good enough? He's been punished for his arrogance. He's fine now." And they said, "No, no, 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 no. Get rid of him. It's time for him to go." And for those of you who don't know, a synagogue is the Jewish version of like a church, or at least it was in the day. Sort of the temple of the Jewish people, the Hebrew people. But even after all of this, Pilate saw no fault in Jesus. And he was one of the only ones that was not a part of Jesus' disciples. So he didn't want to kill him. And he even goes so far as to say, "I leave it unto you. I wash my hands of the matter. I find no fault with this man." He didn't want to see him punished, and he definitely didn't want his blood on his hands, because by all accounts, he didn't feel Jesus had done anything wrong. But the majority of people there were less than pleased with Jesus of Nazareth, so much so that they were willing to free a convicted, proven murderer and thief in his place. And with all of these people who were treating Jesus of Nazareth so poorly as he was being marched to Calgary to be executed and hung upon a cross, there's one man who sits above all else in way of how he treated Jesus poorly and without dignity. The man was named Cartaphilus, and he was the door attendant for Pilate's palace. Now, as Jesus was being marched to Calgary, it's said that Cartaphilus struck Jesus and mocked him for walking so slowly. Now, keep in mind at this point he had been lashed, he had been dehydrated and interrogated for several days at this point, for a good deal of time, and he was being forced to carry his own very large cross to the hill where he was to be executed, and Cartaphilus chose to mock him. And it is said that Jesus responded, "I go now, but you shall remain. You shall remain until I return." And that's it. That is the basis for the entirety of this folklore. And it would be less than interesting if it ended there. But it does not. Now, it is said afterwards that Cartaphilus slowly started noticing that the people around him seemed to age faster and faster. And while he was growing old and he was feeling the pains of age, he didn't seem to feel that death was ever upon him. He never felt the fear of his mortal coil. And it's everything that happens after this point that makes this story truly insane. Cartaphilus is referred to in folklore as the Wandering Jew. And he aged, as I mentioned, noticing that everyone seemed to age faster than he did, feeling the pains of age, but never feeling the mortal toil that came before death. And it was said that some 300 years after he had struck Christ, that he finally felt the terror that was he might actually be cursed to be on this earth forever. So he met with a monk, a Christian monk. He got baptized, and it was said that he spent the rest of his days in a monastery. But again, if it ended there, this story wouldn't be remotely interesting. After his tenure in the Italian monastery, where he had spoken with a Christian clergyman and committed his life to being a monk and serving the interests of the teachings of Christ, you'd think he'd just disappear. But no, some 1200 years later, we see him pop up again. The next person to encounter and record our friend Cartaphilus was a man named Paulus van Eitzen. He was a Lutheran bishop in the 1500s, and he encountered a very old and ancient Jewish man who claimed to have mocked Christ as he walked to his execution. And upon observing the man further, he noted that the man was incalculably ancient. Older than any man he had ever met, his flesh was like stone, and his eyes were white and milky, and he seemed to be as old as time itself. And every motion he cried in pain, continually weeping, as the pain of his body, which wanted to die, was forced to keep on living. It was said that the man wept with every movement of his body. And there would continue to be sightings of Cartaphilus about every generation, where he would go into a church and get baptized and pray for his forgiveness, and then he would disappear again for 30, 40 years, and then continue to pop up until the very last time we hear reference of him. Where in the early 1800s there is reference of him in Hamburg, Germany, and then in the mid 1800s there is reference of him popping up in Salt Lake City, Utah in the United States. And after that final sighting in Salt Lake City, Cartaphilus would once again fade into obscurity and all but disappear from the mouths of history and folklorists, and no one has seen him since. And that is the strange story of how the man who mocked Jesus lived for centuries and then faded into obscurity. And you know what else is in obscurity? These tales of vampires from Ireland in the video that I've done here. I bid you head on over and watch that one, and I'll see you there, my friends. Thank you for visiting the tavern. Stay bloodthirsty, my friends, and remember, all hail the Black Dragons. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.